Hey everyone, welcome to today's Explainer. Okay, so today we're exploring a premise about climate change mitigation that, honestly, it sounds a little bizarre at first, but I promise you it's actually deeply fascinating. I absolutely love when a concept takes something we think we understand completely and just flips it entirely on its head. Today, we're looking at a solution that doesn't involve billion-dollar machines or untested sci-fi technology, but rather something right under our feet.
It actually echoes a recent headline from Canary Media that asks a pretty wild question. Can we fight climate change by sinking carbon into the ground? More specifically, could something as shockingly simple as literally collecting and burying dead trees actually save the world? Sounds way too easy, right? But the research we're going to unpack today suggests this might just be one of the most viable, scalable solutions we have.
Okay, let's dive into this. To understand why we're even talking about burying trees in the first place, we really have to look at the stark reality presented by the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They've explicitly stated that the deployment of carbon dioxide removal, or CDR, is unavoidable. What the IPCC is telling us here is that simply cutting our emissions, that's no longer enough to avoid dangerous warming. We've crossed a threshold where we absolutely must actively pull carbon out of the atmosphere. Carbon removal isn't just some nice bonus anymore, it's entirely mandatory. To grasp the sheer scale of the challenge we're up against, take a look at the massive red arrow on the right side of this disturbed carbon cycle diagram. That right there represents fossil fuels pumping roughly 8 gigatons of carbon into our atmosphere every single year. 8 gigatons. So if we need to remove carbon, we're looking at a massive math problem. Any viable removal solution needs an incredibly massive scale to make even a slight dent in that 8 gigaton number. We can't just plant a few trees in our backyards. We need a planetary level sink.
And this is exactly where scientist Ning Zhang enters the picture. He's proposed a groundbreaking strategy called wood burial. And get this, he estimates this method has a potential carbon sink of up to 10 gigatons of carbon per year. Remember those 8 gigatons of fossil fuel emissions we literally just talked about? This single strategy, if implemented globally, has the theoretical capacity to completely counterbalance our entire fossil fuel output. And the core mechanism behind it? Simply harvesting dead or old trees and burying them.
And this brilliantly illustrates what scientists call coarse woody debris. Dead logs, fallen branches, dying trees. Right now, in nature's normal cycle, this dead wood just sits on the surface, rots over a decade or so, and releases all its stored carbon right back into the air. It's like a revolving door. The carbon is captured by the tree and then immediately returned. So the wood burial proposal asks a really simple question. What if we just intervene? What if we stop that natural rotting process?
Turning this concept into an actual reality involves some surprisingly straightforward steps. Step 1. Enable forced access, using existing or new logging roads. Step 2. Dig large trenches right on the forest floor. And Step 3. Collect the dead wood, cut it down to size, and bury it under the soil. What makes this so compelling is just how low-tech it really is. We aren't talking about building complex, expensive chemical plants to scrub the air. We're talking about using shovels, tractors, and chainsaws, technologies that are thousands of years old or widely available everywhere today.
Now, the specific mechanics of this rely heavily on deep burial. Take a look at the dimensions here. The logs are packed tightly together, and crucially, they're buried under about 5 meters of soil. That thick top layer of soil, that's the secret ingredient. It seals the trench off from the air, creating a completely anaerobic or oxygen-free environment. Without oxygen, the microbes and fungi that normally break down that wood simply can't survive. The decomposition process basically grinds to an absolute halt.
So what does this all mean over time? Notice that green arrow stretching out to the right, following that initial dark blue spike in atmospheric CO2 from burning fossil fuels. Because of that anaerobic environment we just set up, the buried wood is preserved for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. We're literally taking carbon out of that fast, surface-level cycle and locking it away safely, long past the critical peak of the climate crisis. Beyond the science, the economics of this are pretty staggering. We've got a massive contrast here. High-tech industrial carbon capture, like scrubbing CO2 from power plant smokestacks, can cost up to $270 for every single ton of carbon removed. Why so expensive? Because filtering invisible gas out of thin air takes an immense amount of energy and crazy expensive equipment. Wood burial, on the other hand, relies on natural, completely free photosynthesis to capture the carbon. The tree literally does all the hard work for us. That brings the estimated cost down to an incredibly low $14 a ton. Of course, if we're operating on a global scale, we're dealing with big numbers. If we were to bury enough wood to sink 5 gigatons of carbon a year, which is about half of its total potential, it would cost an estimated $250 billion annually. Now, I know, $250 billion sounds astronomical, but let's put that into perspective for a second. It represents a mere half of 1% of global GDP, just 0.5% of global economic output to fundamentally counteract half of all global fossil fuel emissions. When you compare that to the trillions of dollars in damage climate change is going to cause, it is arguably the absolute bargain of the century. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this potential is distributed globally. Notice those deep purples and blues stretching across the Amazon and Congo basins and the tropics, the vast green temperate forests in North America and Europe, and those massive boreal forests across Russia and Canada. This really proves that wood burial isn't just some localized trick. It's a worldwide strategy where almost every forested nation has a role to play. However, it is absolutely vital we look at the whole picture here. This isn't some flawless, magical silver bullet. There is an environmental catch. First off, dead wood on a forest floor is an active habitat for insects, birds, and fungi, so removing it does disrupt local ecosystems. Second, bringing heavy machinery into a forest naturally disturbs the soil. And third, and perhaps the most important point, burying organic matter means you're literally locking up the nutrients inside that wood, keeping them from recycling back into the forest soil for future trees to grow. But here's the good news. Scientists actually believe that nutrient lockup is completely manageable. It all comes down to the carbon-to-nitrogen ratio. You see, wood is mostly just a structural element made of carbon, with a ratio of 200 parts carbon to just 1 part nitrogen. The really vital nutrients, like nitrogen, are mostly concentrated in the leaves, the fine twigs, and the roots, which have a ratio closer to 20:1. So by only burying the coarse trunks and intentionally leaving the leaves and small branches to rot naturally on the forest floor, we can bury the carbon while leaving those life-sustaining nutrients exactly where the forest needs them.
Zooming back out to the big picture, we can see how elegantly this whole concept integrates into smart forest management. We can collect naturally dead trees, or selectively cut older trees to allow vigorous young saplings to grow in their place. We can bury them in trenches, or even store them in above-ground shelters. Because this strategy is low-cost, widely distributed, and incredibly easy to monitor. I mean, you can literally just physically count the logs. It perfectly fits into the broader portfolio of solutions we desperately need to buy time against climate change while we transition away from fossil fuels.
Which brings us to our final, really thought-provoking point. The researcher behind this, Ning Zhang, points out a profound irony in all of this. Coal, the very fossil fuel that's warming our planet right now, was formed millions of years ago by ancient plants being buried in anaerobic conditions, like swamps. What we've explored today is literally manually accelerating the natural process of coal formation. Could it be that using shovels and dirt to mimic the very origins of fossil fuels is our most brilliant, natural bet for undoing the damage they've caused? It's definitely a fascinating question to ponder. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this explainer today and keep your curiosity alive.